So welcome all to the inaugural lecture for Professor Kate Tchanturia. Shall I say that again? Professor Kate Tchanturia? So my name's Allan Young. I'm the acting interim Vice Dean for Academic Psychiatry, and it's a great pleasure to introduce Kate and to kick off this evening's proceedings and to give a little bit of context about this evening. The first thing to do is to give some housekeeping. So if you do have a mobile phone or anything like that, please turn it to silent or vibrate. It's a tradition during the inaugural lectures that we don't take questions after the lecture, but there is going to be a very tasty feast upstairs with Georgian wines and foodstuffs featured, which apparently will loosen your tongue so you'll be able to say whatever you want to Kate thereafter. And just to say that a little bit about the context of this evening, I think ceremony and ritual is very important in universities. Those of us that work in universities tend to get obsessed with the finances and the undergraduate numbers and the postgraduate numbers and the REF and the grants and so on. But there are certain time-honored ceremonies which I think are extremely important. So, for example, there's graduation, when we send our graduates out into the world, which I think is a big thing for everyone. In North America, it's called commencement, which is always confusing for people, but it's commencing the rest of their lives. So these things live with people forever. And when we think of a university, and indeed the idea of a university, as well as, of course, the students and the administrative staff and so on, it's our teaching faculty who are very important. And really, a university isn't the buildings and Bush House, dare I say it. It's the humans who work in it who are important and make the university and carry the culture. And therefore, an inaugural lecture is a very important point. It's a way station for someone. It's a celebration of their arrival. They're joining the professoriate and allows them to look back at the past of where they've come from and where they plan to go to in the future. So with that brief preamble, it's a great pleasure to introduce, I'll say it again, Professor Kate Tchanturia, who's the lead clinical psychologist for the Eating Disorder National Clinical Service at South London and Maudsley NHS Foundation Trust. She's Professor of Psychology of Eating Disorders at King's College and visiting Professor of Clinical Psychology at Ilia State University in Tbilisi, Georgia. I hope I've said all that correctly. So Kate is an academic and a clinician. For more than 2 decades, I know she doesn't look old enough, but that's beside the point. Her clinical and academic work has focused on translational research to promote excellence in clinical practice. She's published over 200 peer-reviewed papers reporting experimental studies of cognitive processing and emotion in eating disorders, as well as their cultural presentation. Cognitive remediation therapy for eating disorders and brief group psychotherapy. And there's one in Georgian, for those of you that want to rush out and buy a book in Georgian about eating disorders from Amazon, clinical assessments in mental health. Kate obtained her qualifications from her country of origin, Georgia, trained in experimental psychology there, received her PhD from the Institute of Psychology, and she moved permanently to the UK in 1997, and has really worked round about here ever since. This institution has, I think, an unrivaled provenance in eating disorders and in applying academic knowledge to clinical translation in eating disorders. And Kate has really been very much part of that effort, along with the panoply of stars who are hiding behind the screen here and elsewhere that I can talk about. So it's a great pleasure to welcome Kate to the stage. She's lectured internationally. She's very well versed in this. I look forward to her lecture very greatly. After the lecture, there'll be a vote of thanks from Professor Ulrike Schmidt, and then we'll adjourn upstairs. But for the moment, can I ask you to join with me in welcoming Professor Kate Tchanturia.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to share this evening with you and see so many lovely, friendly faces. And I have my lovely family here. I have my colleagues, Georgian friends, students, ex-students, neighbors, and also very lovely friends from my children's playground. I see Sharon and Julia there. So thank you for coming in this rainy day. So because this audience is very diverse, I thought I will reflect on my personal journey, which I made twice in psychology. The profession I love, I feel passionate about, and I promise you that rest of the 45 minutes, 50 minutes will be about how life can surprise you, and life will surprise you. I will not talk about age index, which is very boring sort of index which reflects your input and impact on the science. I will give you a little bit of flavor, what it means to be researcher and clinician same time, what we mean by translational research Allan referred to. I asked and did my research around inaugural lectures, because where I come from Georgia, we don't have inaugural lectures. We have theses, we have very formal vivas for all stages in our professional development. But here in Britain, academic institutions celebrate these inaugural talks. And as my dear friend, Professor Carmine Pariante says, this is Oscars for academics. And I agree with Carmine, with difference that in Oscars you do 5-minute speech, and I have whole 45 minutes to tell you about the journey. When I found out I was promoted, it was 1 year ago. I was in Sicily enjoying Maudsley Forum with 2 sirs on these photos, Sir Robin and Sir Simon, and I was absolutely delighted. None of them are here, so I can say what they advised me to do. Both of them are outstanding speakers, and they said, when it comes to inaugural, keep it fun, keep it simple, keep it very easy, make lots of jokes. I'm not going to do that because it's dangerous to joke in front of British audience when English is your third language. So don't expect too many jokes, expect quite a lot of photos. And here on the right, I have my second family. My lovely Janet, Ulrike, and Ian Campbell, who is there, up there. And these are the people with whom I shared all my professional journey for 23 years. And all of them said, keep it simple, you can do it. But 23 years ago, I can tell you it was not the case. My English was even with more heavier accent, and I was losing words. I was quite nervous. And thanks to their kind, positive, very, very reliable support, I got where I am today. So thank you very much, my dear second family. But I will go back to my life journey, and it starts in Tbilisi, in Georgia. These are my parents. They were late teenagers. In fact, they were 19-year-old students of Faculty of Mathematics when they married, and I was born. So 2 very young parents, very strong academic tradition in family, because my father was professor of maths, my uncle, father's brother was mathematician, my grandfather was mathematician. So anywhere you looked in the family, they were academics and mostly in technical sciences. And I was the first one who broke this tradition, and I felt that to study people is far more interesting than to study numbers, and actually I never regretted it. My father's reaction was, probably you are damn right, because I don't see math genes in your sort of academic activities. Then, as every Soviet child, I joined Pioneer Camp, and I proudly wear Pioneer tie, because it was not optional, it was absolutely compulsory. And then I joined Komsomol. Recently I was looking at my papers and I found these old tickets. So it was a sort of ordinary childhood, very happy family. But sometimes people ask me what it was like to live in USSR. It was really good, because if you had lovely family, lovely surrounding, good education, it was perfectly all right to be from that part of the world. And my student years were absolutely golden era, because I loved singing and performing in the student days in the university. We had fantastic friendship groups, and most importantly, beautiful Georgian mountains. And I loved mountaineering when I was a student, and recently a friend of mine sent me this photo, and I realized that I climbed all these peaks and a few others in Caucasus Mountains. I don't do it anymore, but it is lovely, fond memories from early years. And after graduating university, and I got red diploma, many of you will not know what it means. It means first, but that's, the diplomas were color-coded. So blue was ordinary diploma, red one was first. So I got a very competitive place in the university to do PhD in experimental psychology. But at the same time, I had to work because it was part-time PhD, and it brought me to City Hospital in Tbilisi. And the reason why I put this photo here, it is very significant to me, because you see myself and my junior colleagues all are dressed in white coats, and I was so proud to have this white coat. I worked hard, and it was time to earn this important attribute in psychiatric institution. And I started to work in this context, but my supervisor next to me, my Georgian friends will know Gaios Sharashidze's name. He was one of the best psychiatrists in Georgia. He was very kind man, very man with a vision. He was director of this large psychiatric hospital. And he started in Georgia this social psychiatry movement, thinking about rehabilitation more than sort of white coat approach to psychiatry. And this photo represents very well what he role modeled for us. And also, he opened lots of opportunities, because if you were a psychologist in Georgia, there were 3 possible places in Soviet Union, broadly speaking. You could obtain your psychology diploma and psychology qualifications from Tbilisi, from Moscow, and St. Petersburg. These were only 3 big centers of excellence in psychology. So in this context, I was very lucky to born in Georgia and in Tbilisi. Biggest highlight, of course, working in psychiatry and starting work in psychiatry is that I met my lovely husband, Simon, and we married, and we lived together for 30 years, and I have my wonderful children, Sophie and Alex. And when we came in Britain, in London, Sophie was just tiny, and a week ago she graduated Sheffield University, so time flies, and Mommy is very proud of you. I promise I will not embarrass you any further. This is the last time I'm showing family photo. But my next stop is Tbilisi State University, because I doubt we have in King's College many Georgian professors of psychology, or in fact, psychology professors. It is only Lia Wavilashvili I know of, who is working in Hatfield University. She is a professor of cognitive psychology. But other than this, there are limited number of Georgian psychologists working academically in this country. And we are very proud of our heritage simply because this man on the photo, it is Dimitri Uznadze, who was a scholar of very famous and father of experimental psychology, Wilhelm Wundt. And you see Wilhelm Wundt, who founded experimental psychology lab in Leipzig, and Uznadze was one of his many scholars, and his Wundt's international students went in their countries and established first experimental psychology labs. So in this way, we were very lucky to have someone who brought all this wealth and depth of psychological knowledge that time, and he founded Faculty of Psychology and later Institute of Psychology. I mentioned my wonderful supervisor from clinical psychology context, and he was not satisfied with Uznadze theory and theoretical background which Tbilisi University was giving us. So he decided to send us to Moscow, and this was one of the best experiences probably in terms of psychological work. And my psychology colleagues will appreciate that I ended up in Luria's lab in Moscow to study neuropsychology, and I was last trainee to Bluma Zeigarnik. And new generation just Googled Zeigarnik's name. She is not very well known in Western countries, but she created amazing experiments. She was scholar of famous Kurt Lewin, and because of Nazi Germany regime and Bluma Wulfovna was Jew, she escaped in Moscow, and she gave us all depth and wealth of knowledge in neuropsychology. Both of them were excellent examples of flexibility. And in my title, you saw three main concepts: flexibility, bigger picture thinking, and positivity. It is important in the treatment context when we talk about eating disorders, and my expert colleagues know that I tried my best to implement these concepts in the treatment packages, but it is important in life too. For example, Luria was psychoanalyst, and in USSR, psychoanalyst tradition was stopped at some point because of political reasons, and he switched to become neurologist. And later on, he designed and developed amazing psychometric tests, rehabilitation programs for brain lesion soldiers. So he was a very creative man with lots of flexibility. From my own life story, flexibility was key to be adapted and to be sort of flexible to embrace new culture, new country, and you are testimony of that. I see lots of colleagues and friends I gained for 23 years. So flexibility is really, really important. One other thing I wanted to flag up, my generation of psychologists in USSR, back in USSR, were very lucky. Because at the moment and in current states, it means very little to say I'm from USSR or I'm from that part of the East Europe. But 23 years ago, there was lots of curiosity around the country because Iron Curtain was a big monster, big Soviet sort of system collapsed. And suddenly we had floods of the experts from psychology field to visit and share with us their knowledge and experience, and they had curiosity to find out what was going on the other side. And one of the first curious people was Carl Rogers. We could not believe our eyes when he turned up in Tbilisi, and we witnessed his groups. He did intensive training with us for free, a series of lectures. And when I say it to my colleagues, it sounds unbelievable, but that's what he did. He came and shifted paradigms, and in addition to amazing skill set, we got this humanitarian approach, how to handle groups in the most elegant techniques. And actually, Rogers is a pioneer of evidence-based medicine and evidence-based practice, because he was the first one who started to tape record sessions and supervise using recorded sessions. So he taught all this wisdom, shared with us, and later on, his visit was followed by famous Virginia Satir's visit. She is very famous in family therapy. She was working on Jason is nodding because she is really, really one of the classic systemic therapists who contributed to family therapy lots of knowledge. So Virginia worked with us for 10 days. It was just a small group of us, and these free gifts never stopped because they were followed with Gestalt psychologists, etc., etc. So we were exposed suddenly with this amazing opportunity to hear what was going on in the West. Just to give you an idea, when I was born and studied, these were no-no zones with the black plots. You were not allowed to go to the Western countries, to conferences or for tourism, for nothing. But Eastern Europe was a free zone to travel. But as I said, in centers of excellence, there was lots going on in Tbilisi, Moscow. Leningrad was famous for group psychotherapy. Institute of Neurology, Bechterov's Institute of Neurology was very, very important center for group psychotherapy. And again, our Georgian supervisor made sure that he sent us there for several months to study this approach. But later on, when Simon applied for his first international grant, he got funding to study depression in cross-cultural context amongst German, Kenyan, and Georgian population. I was part of it. It was extremely interesting project, and we first time went to Heidelberg, met with colleagues, and Simon applied for Wellcome Trust grant with Professor Tony David, who is my very, very important figure in my life. And I expected to see very old men, because he was very famous for his work in insight and psychosis. But when I arrived in Bethlehem, and on my left, you see celebration in Bethlehem when it was 750 years of Bethlehem, and it was first exposure to Bethlehem beautiful grounds. And when I saw Tony, I could not believe my eyes that he was so young and so famous and so interesting, such an interesting person. And I put Patsy David's photo very separately. I know you are in the audience, Patsy, I don't see you, but thank you so much for your friendship, sharing your beautiful countryside walks with me, and supporting me in very tough and difficult times. So I really appreciate it. And next stop is Professor Ian Campbell. And this is my photo in the museum on the background of Campbell soups. So, I met Ian, and in my broken English, I explained that I will be interested to be part of the perinatal psychiatry psychology crowd. And he said, by the sound, what you are telling me about rigidity experiments, etc., you will be better placed in eating disorders. So let me introduce you to a very famous person in eating disorders. So I'm arriving first time in the institute, and I see that very famous eating disorder person is Nick Troop with long hair. Nick's hair was even longer than now, and he was sort of like rock star, and after all this white coat approach, it was shocking. Apparently very important person was away, and Janet was giving talk in America. And after a week or so, I met Janet, and then I thought eating disorders will be the field I will stay and work in, because Janet has golden heart, big smile, she was very engaging, full of ideas, and thanks to her support and encouragement, we applied for Royal Society Fellowship, we got it. Then my sister came to help me with little children, and the rest of it is history. Here in this photo, you see our small cozy group, because Janet had few PhD students who are very big experts in our field. Lucy Serpel, Francis Conan, and Andreas Karwauts was doing his sabbatical with us. So now they are leading figures in the eating disorder field, but then they were students doing PhD with Janet, and Janet also made sure that I met Padmal De Silva, who was my clinical supervisor. And from day one, I started to collect my clinical cases to make sure that I will be licensed in this country. Because if you are a researcher, for those of you who don't know, if you are a researcher, it's fine to do research anywhere you want. But if you want to practice clinically, unless you are chartered clinical psychologist, acknowledged by BPS, British Psychological Society, you can't really do that. So Padmal was extremely helpful, wise supervisor, and after 2 years of hard work, I got this license to practice clinically, and this is thanks to Padmal, really. This time and first arrival was not without challenges. Food was very different. First of all, communication style, where I come from, people say what they think and they mean it. So it was really difficult, language was difficult, computer was difficult, because when I was doing my PhD, I was doing statistics by hand. And because I was daughter of my professor's father, I was allowed once a week, Saturdays or Sundays, to arrive in the computer room, which was a room of probably this size, with one computer. And when I was giving sort of some of the orders to computer, if I was lucky in the evening, it might have done t-tests or something like that. So now my students understand why I love SPSS. You do. Because it does for you magic in a minute. So computer was challenge and language, and I'm sure Janet will forgive me if I sort of remind her first email, one of the first emails. It said, "Dear team, I CC'd Kate. She's very keen to start autobiographical memory project and eager to start SAP. Shall I tell you what was absolutely puzzling? CC, no idea. Eager, keen, SAP, and I wanted to run away. But Lucy spotted I had really puzzled face, and she said, no, she's not swearing. Actually, it's a good email. All she is trying to say that you will be working in Cambridge and collaborating with Tim Dalglish. And it was really good news. And here in this photo, we have Tim Dalglish and famous John Teasdale. They kindly invited me to give a talk about set-shifting theory, to understand a little bit more about Georgian psychological tradition. And this meeting gave me lots of ideas and food for thought. And we had really excellent collaboration for many months, and it was really, really important collaboration. But now I'm going to show you and give you some flavor, what I feel so passionate about, why I do like psychology. But I had to make really tough choice, because in 45 minutes you can't possibly talk about many dozens of experiments I ever done. You can't speak about projects and research questions I'm excited about. But what you can do to prioritize few experiments, and I thought about my favorite program, Desert Island Discs. How many of you are familiar with this program? Most of you, but I know in audience I have my lovely Belgian friends, lovely friends from Slovenia. Where is Maria? Up there. And many others who might not know yet this fantastic program. So what they do, they speak to interesting people, and then they ask them to choose 8 pieces of important music they like and enjoy, and they give them very tough choice to save 1 piece of music. It's the toughest. And then they also allow them to choose luxury item. I'm going to tell you what experiments I would have chosen if I ever will be invited in the Desert Island Disc program. And also, later on, I will tell you what my luxury item will be. But I will start from the experiments and put it in the context. In psychology, we know quite well how people with mental health process negative emotions. We know relatively little how they process positive emotions or regulate positive emotions. So this was context of one of the questions which very nicely Helen Davis addressed in her PhD. Helen, I know you are in the audience, qualified clinical psychologist, but back there in 2009, you were starting your PhD with myself and Ulrike, and we thought about this very elegant experiment. When we set it up, we gave people with and without eating disorders 3 simple film clips. One was amusing film, one was neutral film, and one was very sad scene from dying mother saying goodbye to little son. What we asked people to do, just to rate their emotions. And we also were videotaping their facial expressivity. And the reason why we wanted to capture very well how people respond to positive or negative stimuli, because body language and nonverbal communication is key in the communications in general, because social psychologists say that almost 80% of our communication comes from our tone of voice, facial expressivity, body language, and only 10 to 15% is content, actual content and words. So it is really important message, and it was not explored much in the eating disorders when Helen started these experiments. We found really interesting results in this experiment. First of all, we found that when people were watching and observing negative scene, they were looking away. Particularly, it was the case when we looked at the data generated from anorexia nervosa cohort. Also, what we found, people with actively ill and in active stage of illness didn't generate any positive emotions or negative emotions. So in other words, they demonstrated these flat emotions in comparison to controls who were sort of producing lots of mimics and micro movements. It is called in social psychology Pokerface. And although this neutral facial expressivity might be super beneficial for poker players, where you don't sort of say to other players what you are holding in hands, this is completely disadvantageous strategy in social communication, because apparently smile is the strongest social signal. And I will play a little video here. This is used in many different areas and parts of the psychology. This experiment comes from America. What you see in the screen, mom is playing with a beautiful, lovely baby, and they play very naturally, very in very positive way. But mom got instruction to keep still face, so she turns, comes back to baby with neutral facial expressivity. And let's observe what happens next. Baby is completely puzzled what's going on. So baby is trying to engage mom, point out, clap, you name it. Baby is trying lots of strategies, but mom is given strict instruction not to move face. So in half a minute, you see how baby becomes very stressed, and I just want to end it on the happy note. It comes back again, all this interaction. So they are playing happily again. So this clip demonstrates very nicely that this positive interaction is key. Smile is only strong, socially rewarding signal, and we as a social animals like to see smiling faces. And if you observe reception later on, if you stand with still face, nobody will talk to you. But if you invite people in your space and give them big, nice smile, as you are doing now, people will chit-chat, and it is very, very useful social strategy. So why it is important in the context of eating disorders? Because everybody smiles in the same language, and we can make good contacts. And what we try to encourage our patients to remember, that people forget what you say, but people never forget how you say it. And sometimes problem is for people who are going through eating disorders to connect with society, to make relationships, to establish networks which are damaged because of eating disorders. And our role as a professionals is not just moving and helping people to move to a healthy plate, We want them to move to healthy life. And part of healthy life is to have tools, skills, abilities to connect with other people. So, next question was, are people able to imitate, actually? And I will show you another clip, and I promise I will not show any more clips during the talk. I love this little baby.
Do the evil eyes, man. Give him the evil look. Do the evil eyes, man. Give him the evil look.
So I think he's amazing. And children as small as this chap here, they can imitate emotions. So one thing is, you might not want to express smile, but in Marcella D'Appello's PhD work, who did PhD with myself and Robin Morris, we found that actually social smile, there is genuine smile when all your face smiles, and there is socially acceptable smile when you just do that. But socially acceptable smile actually is better than flat face. So if you choose to, and that's what we say to our patients in psychoeducational packages, if you choose to, if you really want to make these networks and connections, we can help you and support you with some tools. And idea here will be like in this cartoon. Husband says to wife, you always complain that I don't know how to show my emotions, so I made these signs. And in fact, in some cases, it is okay to have toolbox and to express your emotions safely if you are unable to express it with a very animated emotional face. So we are thinking about these kind of approaches when we talk about remedial therapies, how to regulate emotions. And we remember from neuroscience that brain is plastic and can be shaped and rewired during all our lives. When I was a student, neuroscience had not so much knowledge, and we were told that we are born with our abilities, IQ, etc., etc. Neuroscience challenged this view, and we know that you can compensate, you can learn of all your lives, and brain is evolving all the time. Why it is important in the context of eating disorders, and here I quote wonderful person who has life experience of anorexia. Now she is recovered, she is helping us. Many of my colleagues know her, and of course I'm using this quote with her kind permission. She helps us in family work, in recovery groups, and recently when we asked her to help people to see light in the end of tunnel, she came and shared with the patients what was her experience of anorexia. And what she said was, anorexia destroyed my social life. I lost friends. Recovery is getting my relationships back. And in order to get relationships back, what we hope, these remedial therapies, this awareness what is lacking, and some of the tools we can share with the patients could make difference. So that's why I love what I do, because it allows you to translate some of the lab findings, experimental findings, in real life clinical treatment packages or treatment work or supervision. So it is hugely important that we bridge these two. And I'm very lucky to have fantastic research team and fantastic clinical collaborators who helped to create this book. This is not just written by myself, it is a contribution from many great clinicians who are in the audience, and we produced this to help our therapeutic community to have protocolized inpatient group psychotherapy treatments, and I think it is quite a good, helpful toolbox for people who practice. Other thing, before I finish, I wanted to take a little walk in other area of research which is really important to me. Eating disorders many times affect brain, and we know that structurally brain shrinks. Anorexia in particular, although bulimia as well, it is to do with high physical risks and psychological risks. What we are trying to find out how this malnutrition and nutritional compromise affects functional side of things. So this brings me to the next area of interest, which I kept quite a long time, cognitive signature in eating disorders. This was hugely important to characterize eating disorders in terms of cognitive features, because, as I said before, people are very intelligent, have high IQ, not necessarily big problems in neuropsychological functioning. Some of the neuropsychological features are very subtle. That's what we see in lab. And here is another person who I want to say big thank you, Professor Robin Morris, who is on holidays and can't be here. Robin was really important to help us to develop and merge some of the knowledge which I brought from USSR to British paradigms, because jargon is different. Sometimes we talk about similar concepts but call it different names. So Robin was really, really invaluable to get me into the place where we could select elegantly research protocols which were context-driven, hypothesis-driven in the field of eating disorders. And then several fantastic PhDs followed. They were mainly supervised by Janet. I was co-supervising. It's Joe Holliday, Marion Roberts, Amy Harrison here. So lots of data were replicated about rigidity of thinking, which means inflexible patterns of thinking. And what I mean by that, sometimes context changes, social context or everyday life context, and we need to be flexible. We need to adapt and adjust to the environment. So if I was not adjusting to what I had to do, I would give you lecture in Georgian, because it is difficult to keep grammar and perfect speech in English. So you have to adjust, you have to think in different language. In my case, in case of the, let's get examples from eating disorder world, you have to adjust to healthy plate, which is big challenge, healthy living, etc. So shifting flexibility is really, really important context. Another characteristic and cognitive feature is extreme attention to detail. And Carolina Lopez's work, again, we jointly supervised Carolina with Janet and collaborated with Frankie Hape's group. Frankie can't be here, and it was really useful collaboration with her and group. We still continue to think about similarities and overlaps between anorexia and autism spectrum disorder, and they knew already very well that people with autism show extreme attention to detail versus bigger picture, and paradigms like this can help you to characterize this. Because what we ask participants to do, to identify in complex shape, simple shape like this on the right. So people with autism as well as anorexia are much better than healthy controls to identify these details. But when problem starts, when you try to give paradigms and experimental measures where they need to build up bigger picture. So this cognitive characteristic is also really important in recovery journey. So to summarize cognitive work in one simple picture, what we understood and learned over the years that people with eating disorders, they have average or higher than average IQ. They demonstrate less flexibility in comparison to healthy controls, and they have much better eye for detail versus bigger picture. These studies were conducted in adults, but my PhD students, Kate Tchanturia, who is here, did amazing work in children-adolescent population, and Sam Lloyd, they replicated it in child-adolescent population. But question always is, what then? So if you see poor expression of emotion, what then? Then you try to support people to become better at expressing emotions. What if people are rigid and very bogged down to detail? What do you do then? And Dame Professor Tilwyk's work was very inspirational. In the institute, she did excellent work in cognitive remediation therapy, applying these ideas to psychosis. And of course, in USSR, I witnessed how Luria's lab was working on brain lesion patients to introduce rehabilitation techniques, but there it was with some caveat based on compensatory mechanisms. In psychosis, they do this work slightly differently. In eating disorder context, we needed to calibrate and adapt this approach to make it relevant to eating disorder context. So what this therapy promotes, thinking about thinking, process of thinking rather than content of thinking, because sometimes it is really difficult to work on content of thinking, especially in eating disorder population where it presents in egosyntonic way when people identify themselves with their illness. So I can proudly say that 14 years of hard work led us to a very impressive stage. We had good theory, we had modeling, we had exploratory clinical trials. In-house, all this work was done at Maudsley in our department, and now we have several randomized treatment trials which are international and show some benefits for eating disorder population. We have large randomized treatment trials in collaboration with Stanford University, with Australian colleagues, French studies recently finished in Germany. Very strong RCT was conducted, and there are a few more from Denmark. And my student, Lucia Giombini, is doing it in child-adolescent population, and we can't wait to see results, Lucia. No pressure, of course. And just based on that, probably next few years, our aim will be to go in depth and manualize more treatments based on the experimental studies we are doing in laboratory settings. We have few examples of manualized treatments which were informed by research evidence, and this work will continue, I hope. Now, in the end of my talk, I talked to you about past. Now I want to focus on present. And in present, what is very exciting in the research work we do is comorbidity and exploring comorbidity with autism spectrum disorder. We had very productive collaboration with Simon Baron-Cohen's group in Cambridge. Felicitas is here. She came all the way from Germany. And thank you, Felicitas. You helped with pilot study a lot. So what we found out that our patients in inpatients, almost 37%, could have potentially autism spectrum diagnosis. And we know that in autism field, it is really hard to recognize women with autism. And after this sort of audit clinical data, we decided to go further and research some of the behavioral and cognitive overlaps between these two disorders. This picture comes, I love photos and pictures because they are worth 1,000 words. So this photo I found in the internet, little boy with ASD organized his toys there. And another photo comes from our inpatient ward, of course, with permission of my 34-year-old patient who organizes her special toys like this every single morning. So there are some behavioral cognitive similarities. And with Will Mundy, who might be in the audience, he is a big expert in female autism. We started to explore it further, to employ clinical interviews, and we were very lucky to have fantastic PhD student Heather Westwood, who is doing clinical training at the moment in Royal Holloway. And thanks to Heather's research, we learned a lot about these overlaps, similarities between anorexia and autism spectrum disorder. But we don't want to stop there, because one thing is science, one thing is to identify there are some overlaps, but again, the same old question, what we do about it. And what we are doing at the moment about it, Emma Canard, current PhD student, Emma did excellent work interviewing patients and clinicians. What we need to do better to make sure that clinical pathway for women who have both autism and anorexia could become better. What we can create for them in environment or clinical service provision to make sure that they benefit from our treatments better. At the moment, James Adamson, another great researcher who is sitting over there, is interviewing carers to make sure that we hear everybody's voice. We want to know what people who are actively involved in the treatment, families, patients, and clinicians, what they need to make this recovery journey better and what we need to address in the treatment in better way than we do currently. So watch the space. At the moment, we already know that we will make some tweaks and adaptations based on what we are learning as we go in this journey. We need to be a little bit more sensitive about sensory issues in the people with autism spectrum disorders, because sometimes they might find difficult to eat food if it is certain color or certain quality or certain texture, certain smells. So if we become a little bit more sensitive to these dietary requirements, it might make easier for people to be sort of supported in terms of nutrition. We also can support them with autism-friendly environment, less noise, less bright colors, written communication and clear structure, and most importantly, very specific language, no open-ended or metaphoric language, very specific, very clear. So these are not rocket science changes we are hoping to achieve, but it will demonstrate more sensitivity to the people we care about in this pathway. I'm coming to the end, and I want to say I will not stop there because my mother has this tendency. Anytime I call her to say about promotion or success, her question is immediately, but what is the next? So when I called her and said, Mom, I became professor of King's College, she immediately asked, what is the next? And I punished her, and I started to talk to her about brain imaging study we are doing at the moment. So she said, enough is enough, and she was not interested anymore. So, not to bore you, I summarized in few slides what is the next. Certainly Georgia is in my mind. Remember this song, Georgia is in my mind? So, I'm very proud to say that last year, my PhD student, this is Iya Shehriladze, she spent with me here almost a month. She became familiar with the Maudsley model. Many of you supported her, Dani, Vicky, Nikki, you looked after her very well. She was very inspired, and it was first PhD sort of work in Georgian context. We did really interesting study looking at Georgians living in Georgia, Georgians living in America, Georgians living in UK. Same age, so same social demographic variables, and guess what? Emigration is not necessarily good for you because you have higher rates of eating disorders, and it is pretty much the case in psychosis. We know from Robin Murray's research and many other colleagues from psychosis field, so immigration has ups and downs. So this was quite strong message, and we published this work in Georgia in peer review journals in UK. Many of you supported us in charity exhibition of artwork of psychosis award from Georgia. It kept art therapy workshop going for a couple of years in Tbilisi. So it was really impressive, this fundraising event. And also, I want to say huge thanks to Ian, Ulrike, Janet, Dani, Emmy Harrison, Caroline Norton, who visited Georgia and shared their wisdom and skills with professionals who want to establish specialist services there. And it is my dream that Maudsley model will find way in Georgian context. Again, no pressure, and I hope that many of you will visit my country of origin and help me to achieve my dream. Next project, which is really important, it is funded by Medical Research Council. We are trying to identify structural and functional features in people who have eating disorders and who don't. And also we want to find out whether autism comorbidity makes any difference in terms of structure and function using this high technology and brain imaging techniques. This research is led by Jenny Lepanen, who is quietly probably somewhere in the audience. And without her, it would have been impossible to do this study. Felicity, Dan there, they are actively involved in this study. And again, no pressure, but we are very, very interested to see what's gonna be last result. And you did excellent work recruiting 200 people. And I will quote Robin Murray, who says, when you reach professorial age, you sort of say, we did it, but in fact, professors don't do anything. It's very hard work. We do something, but of course, you did main bulk of the work, and this gives me opportunity to say huge thanks. And Steve Williams, Mima Simic, without your help and support, this study probably would not be possible. I'm really excited about this project. We just started to change pathway clinical provision for people who have autism and anorexia. I have very strong clinical team behind me that you are here in audience, and I'm so excited to see changes in our real clinical life for people who have these conditions, for families, and for clinicians who practice this. This project is funded from the Health Foundation. So now it is time to sort of share with you what I would take in my desert island disc. I'm a people's person, and I will feel very, very awful on my own. So I decided I will take photo albums, and everybody teases me like Japanese tourist. I'm always with my mobile phone or camera and taking and shooting lots of photos. And seeing my lovely family, friends, and colleagues will definitely keep me happy in the desert island disc, in the desert island. So now it is time to say huge thanks to current and past research teams, wonderful Maudsley Forum friends, Maxine and Paula sitting there, clinical teams I enjoyed working with and learned a lot, and of course my lovely international colleagues. This morning I was here listening to Robin Dunbar. Have you heard about Robin Dunbar? What he invented, that person could only have maximum 150 people, like friends, who you can call friends. I don't believe this, because look at you, and I'm a people's person, and I have a lot more friends in Georgia, so maybe I'm an exception, but I definitely have more than 150 friends. So thank you very much for coming, listening to this talk, and thank you for funders who made these bits of research possible. And I will stop there. Thank you.